So,
This meeting is being recorded. Meeting is being recorded. Meeting is being recorded. Meeting is being.
¿qué tal? ¿Qué hubo?
Bien.
Does echo? I'm getting an echo.
Yeah, can everyone please mute themselves?
Mute themselves. Namaste Nrsimhaya. Namaste Nrsimhaya. Lada Lada Daine. Ranya Kashipur Vaksha. Sila Tanka Nakalaye. Ito Nrsimha, Parato Nrsimha. Oh, Yato Yamita So Nrsimha. Nrsimha Hridaya Nrsimha. Nrsimha Madhi Sharanam Prapade.
Nrisimha Madhin Sharanam Prapade.
Avapada Kamala Varenakam Adhuta Singam Palita Hiranyakasitu Tanubhingam Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Tavataya Kamala Varenakam Adhuta Singam Dalita Hiranyakasitu Tanubhingam Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare. That was Prabhupada's melody, by the way. Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa. That was the way Prabhupada sang it. So, thank you all for coming. Today is a glorious day, the appearance of Lord Nrsimha Dev. And on this day, a mere 53 years ago, I had the opportunity to take sannyas. And of course, I have to give special thanks to my wife at the time, Ananga Manjari, because actually without her permission, I could not have taken sannyas. I asked Prabhupada, I went to his room and asked him if I could take sannyas. And he asked my wife whether that was okay or not. And she very magnanimously gave permission because she was a very good devotee. So, I don't know, these are reruns for some people, but the story of how I actually, why I asked Prabhupada for sannyas. I was in Houston. I was the temple president of Houston, and I was very uncharacteristically unhappy. And I always say it. I mean, I had a very good wife, an excellent wife, and was an excellent devotee. So it's not that I didn't like my wife. It was that it just was the wrong ashram for me. Oh. And Krishna made that very clear to me. He actually made it very, very clear to me. And because my dream was to go everywhere and preach the glories of Krishna. That's really all I wanted to do. And so I was unhappy, and I was never unhappy in Krishna consciousness. Just like Parikshit got agitated, so then because there was a plan. So I decided to go to Los Angeles to see Prabhupada. And I brought my wife. And so then I heard news that Prabhupada I'd heard that Prabhupada was coming to Los Angeles. That's why I went there. So I wrote Prabhupada a letter. It was just basically saying, help, save me. Because I understood I wasn't in the right situation. So then Prabhupada wrote back in another letter to someone else. He just said, tell Hriyananda just to wait there for me, I'm coming. So I got there, and this is how I thought of sannyas. Well, a few months before that, we received a letter with Prabhupada's latest pastimes. In those days, there was no digital media, and basically no one made long-distance phone calls in the Hare Krishna movement. It was considered a frivolous waste of Krishna's money. So, but we used to receive mail. Prabhupada's secretary, one of the duties of Prabhupada's secretary had become to just explain what Prabhupada was doing and just give us the news. So I was the president in Houston, and I received one of those things in the mail. And I read something which completely, what's the word? Sort of electrified me, because it opened up an idea to me that I'd never thought of. And that is Tamal Krishna, my godbrother. Tamal Krishna had taken sannyas. And the reason this was so amazing to me is that Prabhupada had never given sannyas to a householder. And there were very few sannyasis in ISKCON. There was Kirtanananda, but no offense intended, he was never exactly normal. And so it's not the kind of thing I would have thought, okay, that's the path, I'm going to follow that path. But then he'd given sannyas to the four, actually, hey, come in.
Sorry to disturb everyone.
Nice to see you. Prabhupada had given sannyas to four brahmacharis, but that didn't work out either. Those were the four sannyasis who had that big hiccup in New Vrindavan in 1970 and were preaching that Prabhupada was God. And then Prabhupada threw them out of ISKCON. And then they came back to ISKCON, but they weren't exactly role models at that time. Because this was just about a year after they came back to ISKCON. So, and I think maybe Trivikram took sannyas, but I didn't know who Trivikram was. And so, actually it's Trivikrama, but you probably wouldn't know I'm talking about. Right. So anyway, so sannyas just wasn't a thing in ISKCON. There was Kirtananda up in these remote hills in the West Virginia Panhandle, and there were four sannyasis who took sannyas because they'd really they took sannyas. Actually, the reason they took sannyas is because even before the big problem in New Vrindavan, they had perhaps even a bigger problem. Well, and that is they were plotting with the Gaudiya Math against Prabhupada. It's all in the Lilamrita. You can read all about this. And so therefore, it wasn't a thing. Sannyas wasn't a thing in ISKCON. And but then Tamal Krishna took sannyas. And he was, famous devotee. He actually, in one sense, in 1969, when I first moved into the Berkeley Temple, I was a student in Berkeley, highly distracted and therefore not doing well. And so then I moved into the Temple of Berkeley, and I asked the temple president if I should stay in school or drop out. And he said, I don't know, ask the regional secretary. So the regional secretary was a brahmachari named Tamal Krishna. So I asked him, and this is very typical at the time. ISKCON was kind of like this little cottage industry, little mom and pop thing. So I asked Tamal Krishna if I should stay in school. And he said, I don't know, ask Prabhupada. So in those days, it was kind of, I don't know, ask Prabhupada. So I wrote a letter to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada wrote back and said, yes, you should finish your education. He said, I want you to be nicely educated so you can preach to other educated people. And that, of course, became my life's mission. That was the first direct instruction I received from Prabhupada, and that was it. And here I am at the BI now. So anyway, in 1972, just maybe a week or so before Lord Nrsimha's appearance day, Prabhupada was arriving, I think, the next day or whatever, and I was standing on the front lawn of the LA Temple, and with my peers. I used to have peers. I mean, people who I kind of grew up with in Krishna consciousness. So, so at that time, Prabhupada had invited any member of the GBC that wanted to come to LA and take sannyas. And the reason was, and this is a very striking statement Prabhupada made. And you can just, I mean, the comparisons with the situation now in ISKCON is, I won't insult your intelligence by having, thinking I have to explain it to you. Prabhupada had written a letter to the GBC, which I read. And he said, that the reason ISKCON is not growing the way it should is because the GBCs, as he put it, just sit behind their desks and manage the eating and sleeping. In other words, just make sure the bills are paid, make sure the puja goes on, there's Mahaprasadam, just manage the temples. And Prabhupada said the real job of GBC is to travel and preach everywhere and personally spread the movement. No comment. So, therefore, he said, any GBC that wants to can come to Los Angeles and I'll give you sannyas. Prabhupada sort of threw down the gauntlet. And 3 GBCs actually took up the offer. They were Satsarupa, Rupanuga, and Bali Mardan from New York. And so everyone, the temple is all buzzing with this thing that Prabhupada is going to give sannyas. And again, sannyas wasn't a thing in ISKCON so much in those days. And so it was like big news. And of course, this is after I'd read that Tamal Krishna had taken sannyas from the Grihastha ashram. So, so then one of the devotees, friends, I think Jayatirtha was there. I don't know, maybe Ramesh, I can't remember everyone was there. One of them said jokingly, hey, Hridayananda, why don't you take sannyas too? And it was kind of a joke. Because it's interesting, because I mean, I was sort of very well known even back then as a preacher. I was always somehow, got lucky with giving classes. So after I'd been in the movement literally about 6 months, I was actually asked to travel around the Northwest United States and teach philosophy to the devotees. That was, I think it was before I was initiated. Maybe it was just after I was initiated. But and I'd gone to LA just a couple months before that, and there was a sannyasi staying there, but they kept asking me to give the Bhagavatam class. And so the sannyasi got really agitated because I was a householder. But so I was known as a preacher. So at first people and so I think one of the reasons people were laughing at the idea that I would take sannyas is because I had an excellent wife. And so every morning I would get up for Mangal Arati. In those days there was like, there's no question not going to Mangal Arati. And so every morning I'd go to the temple of Mangal Arati, my wife would be there waiting. And so she was a very faithful, devoted wife. And I had, I had no aversion, so I was happy to have her come along everywhere I went because she was a good devotee. And so, so people interpret that to mean I was an attached householder because they always saw me with my wife. So when someone said, maybe you should take sannyasa, the first reaction was everyone started laughing. Not everyone. But then someone said, well, actually, why not? He's a preacher. But meanwhile, like the idea was in my head. I was like, There was no turning back. And I realized that I could only take sannyas with my wife's permission. And the reason I knew that is because we heard a story. In those days, all the stories were coming in all the time. That my friend Janamijaya, who was president of Atlanta, had asked Prabhupada for sannyas, but then his wife made a big fuss about it. And so Prabhupada decided, you can't take sannyas because, your wife doesn't agree. So therefore, I realized the only hope I have to take sannyas and really become a world preacher, which is always my dream. The only hope I had was to get the blessings of my wife. And so therefore, we took off a few days, and I just spent the whole day talking to her about it. I think in a very Krishna conscious way. I mean, she was very Krishna conscious, and I just, revealed my mind in confidence, what my dreams were for my life, which just to go around the world and preach Krishna consciousness. And to her credit, actually, and like I said, I'm eternally grateful. She gave her blessings that I could take sannyas. So then I went to Prabhupada's room on that fateful day to pop the question, so to speak. And I thought, I don't know, it's just the way my brain works. I remember when I was a kid, people said, you'd be a good lawyer. So so I this is how I presented it to Prabhupada. I said, Prabhupada, according to Bhagavad Gita, we advance in Krishna consciousness by offering sacrifice to Krishna. And marriage is also a Vedic sacrifice, Vivaha Yagya. And I said, I think I've gotten the benefit of this sacrifice. And so now I'd like to dedicate my life to preaching and take sannyas. And Prabhupada, it's funny, Prabhupada, he said, that's an interesting proposal. So then he said, I will think about it, and I'll let you know. So meanwhile, I was 23 years old and about as patient as, well, I don't know anything so impatient that I could even compare myself to, but if you think I'm impatient now, you should see me back then. So Prabhupada said, I'll think about it and I'll let you know. So I thought, okay, I guess that means in 30 seconds or, at most a minute, Prabhupada's going to tell me whether I can take sannyas. But just at that moment, to my great frustration, Kirtananda Swami and Vishnu Jana Swami entered the room. I wasn't frustrated because I didn't like them. And they came because they wanted to show Prabhupada a slideshow of their big expanding program, the Radha Damodar Traveling Roadshow. And they brought a slideshow. And I thought, oh God, what bad timing on their part. So anyway, so then we went from Prabhupada's darshan room into his middle room, which was his actually his bedroom. And because it was the biggest room of his 3 rooms. And they set up this little slideshow. Anyway, so they showed Prabhupada the whole slideshow, and I was like, so anyway, so finally the slideshow was over. Went back into Prabhupada's darshan room, and he didn't say anything. I said, yeah. So then I made a boo-boo. I made a real mistake, and that is, I tried to kind of direct the spiritual master. So I said to Prabhupada, so Prabhupada, that's okay that I take sannyas? Because Prabhupada hadn't said it was okay. He just said, that's a very nice proposal. So Prabhupada gave me a look. Prabhupada literally talked about, looks that could kill. So Prabhupada gave me one of those looks, and then he said to me very sternly, I said, I will think about it and I will let you know. Is that all right? But I mean, I'm saying it very mildly. And I remember Prabhupada, he was so potent that literally my subtle body flew out of my head. And I just had this sensation of my subtle body kind of circling around the ceiling of the room. And so I was just, I couldn't reply. And then after a minute, my subtle body kind of re-entered my head. And And then I thought, oh, well. And I thought maybe I've just really messed up here. So then, a few minutes later, Prabhupada just turned back to me and said nothing had happened. So he said he just, we just picked up where we'd left off. And then he turned to my wife. I remember she was sitting to my right, sort of a little bit to the back of the room. It was a small room. And he said to her, so what do you think? So as I correctly imagined, Prabhupada did ask her. And then she has a memory of exactly what she said. I have a soft to defer to her, but what I remember, I mean, our two versions are very similar. But what I remember is that she said something like, I just want to be Krishna conscious. And then Prabhupada, he was really pleased by that answer. And he said to her, you are already Krishna conscious. And then he said to his servant, put his name on the list. And then he got up because he was going, I think, to another room. And so I think he actually slapped me on the back. It's the only time Prabhupada slapped me on the back. But, and that was that. So then now getting to Lord Nrsimha Day. So the sannyasa ceremony was set for Lord Nrsimha Day's appearance 53 years ago, a mere 53 years ago. And the temple, it was in the old temple room, in the same address, which then became the Fate Museum. And it was a beautiful temple room because Prabhupada personally designed it. Because that was the first temple purchased in the Hare Krishna movement. The first temple that was actually purchased, not just rented, was the temple in Los Angeles. And Prabhupada, it was a big thing to have this former church. I think it was a Methodist church, and devotees wanted to put the deities in the sanctuary, the most impressive room. Prabhupada said no. He wanted the non-devotees to be able to come and sit on pews and be comfortable. He even insisted the organ should be left there, and that the deities were put in this in what I guess in churches we call the social hall. But it's a beautiful room. So of course the devotees, in strict obedience to Prabhupada, then moved the deities to the room Prabhupada said not to move them to, and now they're even going to spend a fortune to do an Indian type facade, even though Prabhupada said not to do that because he wanted Americans to be happy. So Prabhupada is the original Krishna West leader. Anyway, so I went into the temple room, green satin curtains, yellow walls, white trim, and then a white tile floor and a low altar, actually just about like this, with red velvet and white tiles. And I probably personally designed that. So, so Prabhupada that day for the morning program, because it was done at the morning, he, instead of chanting Radha Madhava, he chanted Bhaja Hure Mana. And I just understood why he'd done that. Because he sang that song to us and he was very much in ecstasy. And it was really a spiritual father telling his children, do not become attracted to this world. Don't be cheated by Maya. And especially because he was telling us, because he said, because one of the lines in that song is Durlabam Amana, that your children, your family, all these things, these are just temporary things, like a drop of water that slides off a lotus leaf. And I understood Prabhupada was telling us that give up all these things, or you are giving it up, so just don't take them back. You should really understand what human life is for. And I had an experience. I was not under the influence of any drug, certainly not a psychedelic drug. I was I was following the principles. But the temple room was like dancing. I mean, Prabhupada sang, and I stood in the back of the temple room because they were setting up the fire arena, the fire area for the sacrifice. And Prabhupada was singing, and it was like the whole temple building was just dancing, moving to Prabhupada's voice. And it was It was quite ecstatic, actually. So then we did the ceremony, and actually Prabhupada had Kirtanananda Swami give the lecture. And then Prabhupada gave us our dandas. The way they would do it in those days is that they, we each had a seat, two on each side of the fire. So here was fire, we were on each side facing each other, and then here was Prabhupada on his Vyasasana, and there was the altar. And so next to our seats where we were sitting, they had our sannyas cloth, and they just are. And so Prabhupada, the lecture was given, then Prabhupada, at a certain point, we went out of the room, went to a room behind the temple, and we changed into our sannyas clothes, and then we came back out, and there were dandas there, so we each, it was like one per customer. By the way, I always tell the story. I thought it was so ironic that I had to make a danda for the ceremony, and so the devotee said, "Oh, we have a place where you can get bamboo." So they drove me over to a place which was my high school, which is sort of walking distance from the temple, and out in the athletic field, they have bamboo growing. So my first danda was made from my high school. I thought there's some kind of amazing symbolism here. So anyway, we took sannyas, and then maybe I'll tell you one more funny little story, and then tell you all the things that Prabhupada told me, including things about Lord Nrsimha. So we took sannyas, and then to celebrate, because there were hardly any sannyasis, and probably most of the devotees in the movement had hardly ever seen an ISKCON sannyasi besides Prabhupada. So to celebrate, they had these big, I don't know if you remember them, these big, what do you call it, farmer, like these vans, sort of like bread delivery vans for Sankirtan. And so they drove us all out, and everyone's really excited. We went to Long Beach. We did Harinam in Long Beach. And in those days, we didn't wear hats or anything. We just, we had no idea of sort of very technical things like skin cancer. So we went out there and we did Harinam, and, with this sun on my head. And so we were coming back, and I was in the sort of the step well of the van, and I was preaching up a storm. The devotees were all there, oh my God, it's Sannyasi. And sort of sort of like the Alachua today. And so I got this, what do they call it, sunstroke or something? And so I felt really nauseous. I mean, like really, really, not just like a little nauseous, but really. And yet all the devotees were looking at me, and so I had to, be the macho young sannyasi and preach and everything. And so I did. I just kept preaching, although I was like that. And so then I got back to the temple, just collapsed. But anyway, so then we went to see Prabhupada. And Prabhupada's mood was, when we went to see him, his mood was like, okay, big shot, I just gave you sannyas. Now, what are you going to do? You're just going to like eat Mahaprasadam and just, just revel in the glory? What are you going to do? How are you actually going to serve Krishna? And so he wanted to know what our plan was. What are you going to do with your life? And at that time, Bhagavan was the GBC of South Europe, and he wanted to open up Spain. There were no temples in Spain. So he asked me if I would do that. So I said I would, but then when Prabhupada asked me, what are you going to do now? I said, well, Bhagavan asked me to open up Spain. So Prabhupada said, first get books in Spanish, then you can go. When I told that to Bhagavan, he sort of acted as if I hadn't said it. But anyway, so when Prabhupada told me that, first get books, he said, when I came to your country, he said, when I was getting off the boat, literally he was walking down from the boat. He said, I didn't know whether to turn left or right. I had no idea what to do. Didn't even know, which way I should turn. And he said, but I was confident. Why? Because I brought my books. And then he said that he brought 600 books, the 3-volume, first canto, 200 of each volume. So Prabhupada said, similarly, you get books and then you can go to Spain. And since that never happened, I never went to open up Spain. So But then we were walking the next day, walking on the beach, Venice Beach. And one other thing Prabhupada told me. He said, just as Lord Nrsimha protected Prahlad Maharaj, so he will protect you. That's the only rational explanation of how I'm sitting here right now in one piece. I mean, there's no other rational explanation of how I made it this far except Krishna's Lord Nrsimha's protection. So the next day, I went to walk at Venice Beach. And I mean, ISKCON was very basic back then. Well, actually, there's probably more superstitions and folk tales from India now than there were then. But I remember Vishnu Jana, we were walking on the beach, and Vishnu Jana asked Prabhupada, he said someone had told him that our sannyas danda is a deity of Krishna, so we can worship it on the road. And Prabhupada just kind of laughed at that. He said, no, your danda is not a deity. So then Satsarupa asked Prabhupada if we should travel with deities. The sannyasis, Prabhupada said, no, Lord Chaitanya never traveled with deities. And so, and Lord Nrsimhadev is not only protecting me, protecting all of us. I mean, how in this Kali Yuga, given our somewhat checkered life history, I mean, how could we be following principles? How could we be firmly faithful to Krishna, which we'd never heard of before? Well, not in this life. So, Lord Nrsimhadev, through Prabhupada's instructions, is actually protecting us. And I think that's a very important point. We can't just live a decadent life or a selfish life and then just call out to Nrsimhadev. Of course we can do that, it's better than nothing. But actually the real protection is to follow Prabhupada. That's the real protection. If we follow Prabhupada strictly, then we will be protected. So I think the next one thing I have to mention, just because I haven't made any heavy criticism, so I feel like, just not being myself today. But I think in terms of the next Hare Krishna explosion, one thing that would be good is to actually understand what the varnashram system is and what it isn't. So a few things about Varna and then a few things about ashram. Many people, could someone just straighten that little picture of Krishna and Balaram? It's right back there.
Which was
Yeah, straighten it out.
like that.
No, the picture is crooked. Yeah,
Which way?
Radha, yeah, push it that way a little bit.
This way?
Yeah, that way. The bottom a little bit that. Yeah, that's good. Perfect. Thank you. So some people think that in order to establish varnashram system, we should just sort of get an acre of land and buy a cow, and then that's the glorious varnashram revolution. The only problem is that if you go out, I mean, it's a noble thing, and I respect those devotees who've done it. But if you just go get a couple acres of land and buy a cow, the world doesn't change. In fact, I don't think anyone really cares that much that, so many miles down some dirt road, you've got a cow. The real point is, if we want to establish the Chaturvarnyam, the Varna system, which Prabhupada started talking about a lot in 1974 in Vrindavan, and I was there participating in those conversations, it starts from the head. It starts from the head. And so talk about establishing Varnashram now, or the Varna system in the West, is somewhat frivolous, because Prabhupada had established the head back then. Prabhupada had established the head. He had a powerful urban preaching mission with his disciples going everywhere, literally every town and village, and giving out his books. So the head was there. But of course, ISKCON, which is supposed to be the head of society, kind of self-decapitated. And the way it did this is by the disastrous conclusion or belief that rituals are more important than education. Prabhupada always said that the train runs on two tracks, and one is Pancharatrik Vidi, the temple worship, which is necessary, and the other track is the preaching, education, teaching. And he said the education is more important. The Bhagavad Gita is more important. So how much money does ISKCON spend per year around the world on rituals, on temples, and how much on schools, education? ISKCON spends tens of millions of dollars, not only in Mayapur, tens of millions of dollars building temples for elaborate rituals. And in Europe, you can't find a devotee school. In South America, where there are thousands of devotees, you can't find a devotee school. Rituals you can find everywhere. So therefore I say ISKCON is kind of, self-decapitated. Because the real head of society is the Brahmin class, not the Pujari class. And I don't mean any offense to Pujaris. They are also great souls. But the head of society, Prabhupada meant to teach. And so when he started buying, instructing the devotees to buy land and cows and everything, there was a head on ISKCON. There was a very powerful preaching mission, which is now just a tiny, tiny shadow of what it used to be. Nothing like what it used to be in the Western world, preaching to Western people. So it's like if you build a house, first you build the foundation, then you build the walls and everything. And so if the foundation collapses, you don't just keep building. Go back to square one and redo the foundation. You don't put the ceiling on the walls, the roof, when the foundation collapsed. So what's actually needed now is to restore a head to transform ISKCON, or at least part of ISKCON, some of ISKCON, honk if you like Krishna West, to restore that head by powerful preaching, and not just Bhakti Shastra courses that teach you how to preach to the already converted. We need courses, and of course the BI is very relevant in this. And so after this talk, please everyone go and write a check for all your life savings to Brahmatirtha. Right? So that's the real need. And if we want to teach people, you can't walk into the classroom wearing, funny costume and expect the students to take you seriously.
That's the real need.
So it's very, anyway, you've all heard this so many times before. So Lord Nrsimha, on this day, we should think not only how we can be protected by Lord Nrsimha, if we are really Vaishnavas and we're not third class, which is an official Bhagavatam definition of a material devotee, which means puja-centric. If we actually understand Prabhupada, we should be trying to extend Lord Nrsimha's protection to the whole world. We should be helping other people to get that protection, not just save our own neck. Because if you are dedicated to serving Prabhupada, basically you are protected. So that's what we need. We need another Hare Krishna revolution to actually restore what Prabhupada left us. It's very famous when Prabhupada left. He said, if you can't increase ISKCON, at least maintain what I've given you. We failed to do that. I mean, no, I'm not going to blame any individual or person, however sorely I'm tempted. So there's no, it's not a question of blaming anyone, but why don't we wake up, acknowledge the truth, and not live in a little kind of Hare Krishna bubble dream world? where if you go to the temple and everyone's chanting, somehow life is great. So Prabhupada gave us an instruction, and if at first you don't succeed, try again. ISKCON, as a society, failed to carry out Prabhupada's order, to maintain what he had given us. And so the only honorable thing to do for someone that actually has some sense of honor, the only honorable thing to do, since Prabhupada saved all of us, is to get to work. Get to work and restore his movement. And one of the reasons we have so many problems is if you don't embrace the problem of spreading this movement, Krishna will give you other kinds of problems. So it's a question of choose your poison. You know, do you want to spend your whole life wrestling with your own personal problems? Or do you want to spend your whole life in glory, ecstatic, addressing the problem of trying to save this miserable, almost unbelievably stupid planet? So on this day, a real Vaishnav, who is Suradak Sarva Dehinam, the well-wishing friend of every creature, every living creature. Titikshava Karunika, you know, the characteristics of a saintly person. Tolerant. I'm probably most famous for my tolerance, but I don't want to brag. Titikshava Karunika, merciful. Suradat Sarva Dehinam, the dear friend of every conditioned soul. The dear friend of every conditioned soul. So that's what we should be doing. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it? I mean, why should we put Krishna to the trouble of having to bring in another generation of devotees who are just a little more serious and intelligent than we are? And so that's what Prabhupada said, Rancho Park, Los Angeles. You've been there? We were walking to Prabhupada. I always tell this story, but I just got to keep telling this story. We were walking to Prabhupada and we stopped by this little hill just north of the tennis courts. And Prabhupada stopped and he was quoting that verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Nimitta matram bhavasavya sachan. Mayai vaite nihata purvameva. All of these warriors have already been killed by me. You just be the instrument, nimitta. And so then Prabhupada was saying that Lord Chaitanya is going to spread his movement. It is going to be victorious. So why don't you take the credit? He was pleading with us. And I was thinking, why is Prabhupada pleading? Because we're his disciples. Of course we do whatever he says. Haha, how naive I was. You know, just like wait and you'll find out why Prabhupada was saying that. So Suradak Sarva Dehinang, and the well-wishing friend of all living beings, he said, why don't you take the credit? Krishna will give you the credit. Your life can be glorious. But if you don't do it, someone else will do it. But why don't you do it? I never forgot that. I mean, honestly speaking, I'd say a very strong majority of the Hare Krishna movement, I include myself, you know, we've had years and years to indulge our personal, you know, desires and everything, our self-absorption and all that. I mean, my God, am I going to take it to our grave? You know, Krishna has given us so much. When does the time come to really get back on the battlefield? Really get back on the battlefield so that your primary activity in life, the primary expended with your energy, you put most of your energy into saving all of us from the shame of having failed Prabhupada's last instruction to at least maintain what he gave us. So personally, I want to go out in glory, not in shame. And so therefore, we have to get to work. And then we will be protected. You can't be protected by Lord Nrsimha just, you know, I mean, the mantras definitely help, and I sing them every day. But ultimately, if you are very dear to Prabhupada because you're actually doing what Prabhupada wanted, that's the real way to get protection. So, nothing controversial there. So any questions on these points? Yes, Badarayana ji.
Thank you so much for this, first of all, your realization, which is so spot on, and understanding Prabhupada's desire and mission, and the kind of failure to really prosecute that in a systematic way as the top priority. So in that regard, what are some of the steps that you would say you had the manpower, et cetera, and finances to systematically establish this teaching priority, educational priority, Brahminical priority of education,
Right.
educating intelligent people in the West?
Okay. Good question. Very good question. Any other questions? Just kidding. Okay, so well, as you know, we started a project called Krishna West. And I know for a fact that it was actually Krishna that inspired that project, and it was Krishna who actually even named it. And it's the only proposal on the table in the Hare Krishna movement or any of its, cousin institutions. It's the only proposal which is very solidly based on real Shastra, not kind of imaginary Shastra like you have to wear devotional clothes and things like that. It's based on real Shastra, real Vaishnava history. It's based on what Prabhupada actually said, everything that Prabhupada said, not just this little, selection of comments Prabhupada made, ignoring the innumerable statements he made, pleading with us to do something like Krishna West. It's based on that. And at the same time, it is totally non-deviant. Like people always say to me, well, what's the Krishna West program? And I always tell them, and they're always surprised, it's Prabhupada's program. In the Republic, Plato says that there are three parts of a human being, which are the intellectual part, the emotional part, and the senses. And so Prabhupada's little program is perfect because the kirtan, you do kirtan, it's emotional, you engage the emotions, singing, dancing, and then you explain Shastra, Bhagavad Gita, that's the intellectual part, and you take a little prasada, that's the engages the senses. So it turns out that Prabhupada's simple program is perfect. It's perfect. And we have to open centers. And also, what is it in unity, their strength? How do they say that? So I started Krishna West. And so in their incredibly brilliant move, the leaders of the movement, when I presented the first and only rational, scripture-based, Prabhupada-based proposal to restore the Western mission, what did they do? They stigmatized it. So that devotees all around the world in all these remote countries, they agree with it, but they don't want to really join because they're afraid they'll get in trouble. So talk about having an incredible ability for shooting yourself in the foot. So it's just like Prabhupada. We have to have the courage to just, one thing that ISKCON has lost, and there's another key point. We used to have the ability to form large-scale projects. Nowadays, everyone is a lone operator. Everyone, is an independent thing. It's just like, example I always give is Italy. If you look at Roman Italy, the Romans had a genius for organization, engineering bridges and aqueducts, and also engineering society. And so they had this, it was the most united the Western world has ever been up till today. And there was a Pax Romana. You could go anywhere for thousands of miles, same laws, same justice. And so so then what happened? It went to one extreme, because they ultimately went too far when they started the empire. They started having emperors, actually, it got too centralized. And then it went to its exact opposite. Italy, the most decentralized country in Europe, where they literally, for centuries and centuries, couldn't form a larger political entity than a city. So it just became its opposite, the dialectic. pendulum effect. So ISKCON, because it had this very top-heavy leadership, and literally, no one could think but the leader, it's gone to the opposite, where it's just become chaotic, and everyone, no one can join anything. No one can actually, like, take Alachua. What do you get? You bring 2,000 devotees in one place, one county. What do you get? Maybe hundreds of little groups. My friends and your friends, and this little group and that little group. A society of people incapable of uniting, even to save Prabhupada's mission. Incapable. An example is that when Greece, which was city-states, when it was conquered by Rome, because Rome kept rising, kept becoming more powerful, and then they started to look at Greece. And Greece, in order to save their civilization, it wasn't one country, it was all these city-states. In order to save their autonomy, their freedom, their everything, they had to unite, and they could not do it. To save themselves, they could not do it. And they were conquered. And that was the end of the independent Greek culture for another, couple of thousand years. And so ISKCON, that's what ISKCON is in the West. Incapable of joining something, even to save Prabhupada's mission. So everyone, dabbles in this and dabbles in that and thinks Krishna West is a good idea, but no, they won't join it. Why? Because someone somewhere may not look favorably on it. It's not about how Prabhupada will look upon it. It's not about if it's actually good for Prabhupada. That's not the point. What will my friends think? What will people that aren't even my friends, what will they think? So everyone today is all about themselves. In Portuguese, what would they say, Lilananda? Sua vidinha. Cada qual. Yeah, cada qual na sua vidinha. Everyone in their own little life. So I'm trying to not only restore, let's actually go out and help people and not look like Martians when we do so. And we have to form large-scale projects if we're going to actually save Prabhupada's mission. And everyone has become addicted to their own little life and their own sort of like pseudo-independence and freedom, which doesn't include the freedom to actually be useful to Prabhupada in a significant way. So that's what it is. I'm encouraging everyone to join Krishna West. Why? Because it's intelligent and it's strictly based on Prabhupada. If all of you who know ISKCON know that in ISKCON, if you want to do a Western preaching program, the first thing you have to decide is, okay, what's our disguise? Is it astrology? Is it Vedic culture? Is it Ayurveda? All these different little subcultural things are supposed to be, yes, it's a way of indirectly spreading the movement. But the original bridge program was done by Vyasa himself. And Narada said, you messed up. That's what all these other literatures were in the first canto. They were bridge programs. The problem with most ISKCON bridge programs is I call them foot of the bridge programs. Just like, why did the chicken cross the road, to get to the other side? Why did the chicken cross the bridge? To get to the other side. So I don't see large numbers of people pouring over the ISKCON bridges. And why? Because they're not stupid. And they look and they see what's on the other side of the bridge. And it's ethnic India with all the superstitions and all the irrational definitions of Vedic culture. So it's just like, David. Yeah, we were talking today, and we were talking about preaching to like prominent people, famous people. And I said that the problem is that we have devotees, gurus who are really very expert at that. They somehow, get to speak to all kinds of famous people. The only problem is none of these people ever joined the Hare Krishna movement. Why? Because they don't want to destroy their careers. So what's the use of giving a book to some famous person who's never going to actually be useful to Prabhupada because doesn't want to be publicly ridiculed? So we need, that's what Krishna West is. It's a branch of the Hare Krishna movement that people will not be embarrassed to join. And that intelligent people, it makes sense. I get letters every day that I came back to ISKCON or I've taken up this Christian consciousness finally because someone is presenting things rationally. So anyway, this Lord Nrsimha's Appearance Day, you want to be protected? Protect Prabhupada's honor. Every day we chant Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Am I the only one on earth that notices that we're glorifying Prabhupada for something that didn't happen? Am I the only one? You know, if you read the fourth canto, where they're glorifying Prithu, and he says, hold on, you know, wait till I do it. First I'll do it, then glorify me. Of course, Prabhupada was doing it until we managed to, what's the word? Just downsize everything Prabhupada did. Turn a powerful, relevant, growing Western mission into a forgotten little movement with that most people nowadays haven't even heard of. By the way, I looked up today because I'm always looking for new arguments. My unfortunate nature. So take the Greek Orthodox Church. They have over 600 churches in this country and about, a little under 2 million members. And when's the last time anyone in America ever thought seriously about the Greek Orthodox Church, if you're not Greek Orthodox? I mean, does anyone care about it? Except they do have some nice architecture. Actually, in Santa Barbara, they wrote. But anyway, that's the point. If you become an ethnic church where you're building mandirs and you're getting donations, yeah, the faithful will maintain the temples and, you will be solvent, you will have enough money, and you will be totally irrelevant. And that's why Prabhupada emphasized something which, the collective amnesia of the Hare Krishna movement has forgotten, that he wanted Western people, Americans. I was sitting on the floor there in the Honolulu airport as Prabhupada gave a press conference. There were all these reporters there, and Prabhupada pointed at us and then said to the reporters, "These are American boys and girls. I've not imported them from India." Of course, he couldn't say it nowadays at the airport. "I'm not criticizing devotees from a Hindu background. They're great souls. They're doing everything right. They're not doing anything wrong. I give them all respect. They are not the problem. To the contrary, they are a success story for ISKCON." This is not a criticism, because some people obviously, don't have high IQ say that, well, Krishna West is, is racist or something, because we want to restore Prabhupada's mission. So that's the point. Greek Orthodox Church, we don't have 600 temples. We don't have 600 temples. They have, dozens of times more temples than we do, more committed members, and they are only relevant to members of their churches. So anyway, that's my appeal, that we remember Prabhupada and actually restore what he gave us. Yes.
Two questions. One, I hope it's not deflecting away from the core argument you're making, but you mentioned that your former wife envisioned it in one way, that you spoke about how you saw it.
Well, it was
How she did, but then
they're both paraphrases of each other.
second question is,
Yeah.
Prabhupada was leading the planet.
Yeah.
Prabhupada said 50% of my mission is accomplished and varnashrama. And so I would say that many people come and would very much like to be, how would you say, absorbed in the Hare Krishna movement, but because if a person is not Brahminical or is not Kshatriya, say they're just, Kali Yuga Vaishya, how they can be guided by leadership to be engaged and be inspired.
Okay, it's a good question. So if I could just say one thing about, yeah,
Just, let me just finish, just so you get an idea of like what I'm trying to say. It's like, so for many years, for 15 years, I tried to dovetail the fact that I wasn't very qualified to join the Hare Krishna movement. But I was genuinely trying to and following the directions of different leaders. And then at some point I just said, well, to hell with the Hare Krishna movement. I'm just gonna be a businessman and raise my family. So when now I'm older and I'm thinking, I have no challenge towards anything you've spoken, but it seems to me that it's like, it's up to the leaders to try to guide us.
okay,
How we
okay.
can be
Yeah.
fully integrated, and then that is fulfilling Prabhupada's.
Okay, but right now, the simple fact is I respect the leaders or Vaishnavas, but they are not. I have invited many of the leaders in North America and other places to work with me, not to come under me. You have your own autonomous project, but let's get together and let's really rebuild the Western mission. And they very nicely said no. And the main reason was they didn't want to, they're afraid someone might not like it. They might. So
That was me, sorry.
anyway, okay, I want to respond to some things you said. First of all, regarding the 50%. That's true. I mean, as far as I know, Prabhupada did say that. The problem is the first 50% collapsed. Western preaching has collapsed. There are still some excellent devotees, Kalakanta and others. I mean, the Bhakti Center. I mean, I have my, obviously we always have our little critiques, but basically very sincere devotees. So there are some nice projects. Other parts of the country, there's in Ypsilanti, Michigan, there's a program. Again, they might not do things exactly the way I would do them, but they're good devotees and they're trying. And they're making a contribution. So, but when Prabhupada said the 50%, it's because, for example, in the BVT in LA, every monthly, they would print 1 million Back to Godheads, monthly. And it was for Western people. So the 50% collapsed. And now we have to rebuild it. Same thing. You know this. You're building a house. You start with a foundation. The foundation of the Varna things, let's say getting land and all that, which is a great thing. I wish I could live in the country. But the foundation of it is you have to have a preaching movement that is bringing in people who can populate the farms. Back when Prabhupada was here, devotees would buy a farm and just send 30 devotees there. And you had an instant community. And because there was so much powerful preaching going on, it could be subsidized. There was money. There were, men and money and women, of course, and there were schools. That's all gone. It's all gone. And so, yes, we do have to fulfill Prabhupada's entire vision, which includes, as you said, the varnashrama. But you have to work. The foundation collapsed. We have to rebuild it. And so I want to go in Prabhupada's order. That's how Prabhupada did it. First, he established a powerful urban preaching mission. And then he took all the assets that produced, and he devoted a lot of them to creating model communities in the country. As far as you, as far as ISKCON, here's my take on it. ISKCON to me is Prabhupada, and it belongs to Prabhupada. ISKCON doesn't belong to me, and it doesn't belong to any other senior or junior person, any man or woman. It's Prabhupada's movement. And therefore, if I see people who don't quite grasp what Prabhupada wanted, at least in the West, or just unable to carry it out, I'm not going to turn ISKCON over to people who I feel don't have a very clear understanding. I'm not going to say, okay, it's yours, you take it. Who am I to say that? It's Prabhupada's movement. It belongs to Prabhupada. It belongs through Prabhupada to Krishna. So therefore, what I'm going to do is try to fix it. And I know because, working under Prabhupada, I'm the last active preacher in the world in the Hare Krishna movement who was trained by Prabhupada as a Western GBC. And when there was a problem, Prabhupada had one instruction: fix it. Fix it. And so I'm going to spend my life, the rest of my life. I don't want to die in necessarily in Vrindavan or in some ISKCON retirement community. I want to die in the battlefield like Prabhupada. Of course, he was in Vrindavan, but he was preaching to the end. And he had a powerful preaching mission even in Vrindavan. So I'm going to spend the rest of my life, as long as I'm able to, trying to fix this for Prabhupada, because it's his movement. It doesn't belong to the people who are turning it into an ethnic, ritual-centered church. It actually belongs to Prabhupada, and he wanted and making a powerful Western mission was actually it was the main strategy Prabhupada had to save the planet.
Just a comment from when I first joined here in Gainesville in '73, we went out and shaved heads and devotees and distributed books that way. And then Krishna West came like about a year later.
It did?
Yeah, we were all told to no longer go out wearing robes.
Oh, for books, you mean?
For
book distribution.
We were told to put on
Yeah,
Western clothes.
which Prabhupada liked. Because actually the robes are they're Indian/Muslim. They're not Vaishnava. There's no history of it. There's no injunction of it. It's not devotional dress. ISKCON has invented the idea that dhotis and saris are devotional dress. It's not historical. And when Prabhupada saw a picture of Balavanta running for mayor of Atlanta, and he was wearing a coat and a tie, Prabhupada said, this is one of Satrupa's books. Prabhupada said, this is what I always wanted, that you become famous as American Vaishnavas. And I was just watching some videos of Prabhupada yesterday where all of his, disciples, they're Western clothes and everything. Leelananda, you wanted to listen? And then I've got to run. Actually, we have a Krishna West leadership meeting. Hey, Janeshwari, got to take you with me.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Yes. Okay. So Leelananda, last question or comment or.
It's just a quick technical question. It's a Sanskrit question. Well, in the verse that you said, Titiksha Karunika, what is the pronunciation of the last word? Is Karunika, Karunika? What is it?
Karunika. See that? In Krishna West, you get free Sanskrit pronunciation help. Yes.
Can I actually ask the last question? The way in which the movement was preached in the 70s,
Yeah.
people only had TV at home. They didn't have phones. They didn't have all this media and stuff.
Right.
So I actually wonder a lot about how people preach today and how people perceive us at UF, how they perceive us on the corner of 13th and University. Like, it's very different than it was even just 20 years ago. So I'm curious, just a little bit of your take even on how preach differently. What would and show Prabhupada?
I think we should chant Krishna's holy names in public in appropriate times, places, and manners. When I taught at the University of Florida, I thought, well, this is Gainesville, everyone loves Hare Krishnas. What I found was that a lot of people in the university think we're a little crazy. They like us. It's just like people aren't going to join the Salvation Army. If you're if you've fallen on hard times and you go to the Salvation Army, you get a little furniture, get some clothes, you're grateful, you appreciate it. You're not going to join the Salvation Army. And so I think, with all due respect, the movement is not, anyway, I've already said this. I think this is what we need to do. Prabhupada, when he found out his disciples were going out to sell books with Western clothes, he was very happy. And when someone complained, no, Prabhupada, I want to wear a dhoti, Prabhupada said, well, you can do that if you like. In a Bhagavatam purport, when Prahlad Maharaj was accused of, or they thought Vaishnavas were sneaking into the Hiranyakashipu school to preach to Prahlad. And then Prabhupada said, yeah, we also go in disguise, and that's very good. So anyway, I was with Prabhupada. We were in a car. on the way to Waikiki Beach for a morning walk. And Prabhupada said, he said, you don't have to wear these Indian clothes. I never said you had to wear them. So I've written essays showing the real Prabhupada. Basically, very conservative devotees have created a Prabhupada in their own image as very conservative. And I've written essays with dozens of quotes from Prabhupada showing that no, that's not the real Prabhupada. Just read his conversations with Allen Ginsberg. So I've got to run, but thank you all very much. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, join us, and we'll give you a free sweet ball or something
Hare Krishna.
with monk fruit sweetener.
Hare Krishna. Hare Bo.
Perdón,
Thank you
tenía
so
que
much.
irse a una reunión.
Thank you so much.
Jaya Jaradeva, please, I have a question. Can you please answer my question? It's very
Ajá,
quickly.
ya se fue porque tenía una reunión. Avisé de tu consulta, pero tenía una reunión ahora.
Ah, bueno, gracias.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Feliz Krishna.
Gracias.
Hare
Hare Krishna.